3 weeks earlier, Naomi Shaw had stepped off the stage into Cutter's Bend with a single trunk, a midwife's bag she hadn't needed on this trip, and a scar of a different kind, entirely a fever at 19 that had taken her mother and left Naomi alive, and empty in a way no doctor in the territory had ever offered to fix. She'd come west on a teaching post. Not a marriage prospect, but Cutter's Bend was a town that ran on practical arithmetic. One schoolteacher, one widowed rancher, raising his late brother's orphaned girl alone, and a whole county's worth of opinions about what a woman like that owed a man like this. Elijah Vance hadn't courted her with flowers. He'd shown up at the schoolhouse 3 Saturdays, running to fix a bent stovepipe nobody had asked him to fix, and stayed to hear his niece Della read her letters out loud. And somewhere in the space between the stovepipe and the reading lessons, Naomi had stopped bracing herself every time he walked through the door. She told him the truth on the porch, because she'd decided, somewhere around the 2nd Saturday, that she would rather lose him honestly than keep him on a lie that would find her out eventually anyway. Every man before Elijah had found some kind eventually. Every one of them had left the same way gently, with apologies, like she was a house with a foundation crack nobody could responsibly buy. Elijah Vance had simply opened the ring box anyway. What Naomi didn't know, what nobody in Cutter's Bend said to a newcomer's face, was that the Vance ranch carried a weight older than any wedding. Elijah's father, Josiah Vance, had died leaving 11,000 acres of the finest grazing land between the Brazos and the Caprock, and a will that Elijah's sister-in-law, Constance Vance, had never stopped believing was written wrong. Constance had married Elijah's older brother Thomas, born no children of her own before a riding accident took him 4 years back, and had spent every season since insisting quietly, patiently, to anyone who'd listen at church socials that the land was meant to pass through blood, and blood alone, and that a childless second marriage on Elijah's part changed nothing about who the ranch would belong to when he too was gone. Della was Thomas and Constance's daughter. 8 years old, quick as a fox, raised these 4 years by her uncle because her own mother had never once, in Della's memory, asked to keep her. Naomi noticed the arrangement before anyone explained it to her. Constance visited the ranch with a regularity that had nothing to do with affection, always with a lawyer's letter in hand, always with some fresh concern about the girl's proper upbringing, always leaving Della quieter than she'd found her. "She wants something," Naomi said to Elijah, the 2nd week of her stay, watching Constance's buggy roll off down the road. "She's wanted something since Thomas died," Elijah said. "Never could get her to say what, straight out." The clue came from Della herself, 3 days after the porch and the ring box, in the offhand way children hand you the truth, without knowing its weight. "Aunt Constance says I have to come live with her by Christmas," Della said, swinging her legs on the porch step. "On account of the will." Naomi went very still. "What will, sweetheart?" "Grandpa's will. She says it says I have to be raised by blood family, and Uncle Elijah's not going to have any of his own now that Della stopped herself. The way children do when they realize partway through a sentence that it might be a door better left shut." Naomi didn't finish it for her. She went and found Elijah in the barn instead, and told him what Della had said, and watched something harden behind his eyes that she hadn't seen there before. "There's no clause like that," he said. "My father's will left the ranch to whichever of his sons survived him. Plain as that. I read it myself the week we buried him. Then, where would Della hear such a thing?" Elijah didn't answer that, but the next morning, he rode into town, to the land office, to ask the county recorder for a certified copy of Josiah Vance's will, a document that should have been sitting in the same drawer it had sat in for 4 years. It wasn't there. The recorder, a nervous man named Whitlock, said the file had been misplaced some months back, and no one had yet gotten around to locating it. Constance Vance chose the Harvest Social to make her move the one evening of the year when the whole county gathered under paper lanterns strung between the church and the Grange Hall, and gossip traveled faster than the fiddle music. She found Naomi near the cider table, smiling the particular smile of a woman who has already decided how a conversation will end before it begins. "I do hope Elijah's told you the full situation," Constance said, "before you go planning a wedding. About the will. About what's required for that girl to stay where she belongs." "He's told me what's true," Naomi said. "That the ranch is his outright. Is that what he believes?" Constance's voice carried, just enough, to the small cluster of neighbors near enough to catch it. "Josiah always meant for that land to stay in blood hands. He told me so himself, more than once, before he passed, that if Elijah never had children of his own, the girl and the land both ought to come to family who could carry the name forward properly." She let her eyes drift, deliberate and slow, to Naomi's middle. "I understand that's grown rather more complicated to promise these days, hasn't it?" The paper lanterns swayed. The fiddle kept playing, a beat too long, before someone noticed the silence spreading out from the cider table and let the music die. Naomi felt the whole Grange Hall's attention land on her at once, the particular familiar weight of being examined, and found short. She didn't run from it. She'd run from it enough times in enough towns to know it only followed you. "I don't know what your husband told you before he died," Naomi said, steady, "but I know Josiah Vance's actual will doesn't say a word about it, because it's sitting missing from the county recorder's office this very week, misplaced right around the time you started telling half this town what it supposedly says." Constance's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. That was when Elijah crossed the hall, unhurried, the way he crossed every distance that mattered, and stood beside Naomi without needing to be asked. "That's no way to speak to her," he said, "or about my brother's memory, using words he never said." "You don't know what he said to me in private," Constance answered, thin now. "No," Elijah said, "but I know what my father wrote down in front of a witness, and I intend to find it." The county recorder's missing file turned up nowhere, and the trail toward it turned cold fast enough that Elijah began to suspect it had never been misplaced at all. It was Naomi going through the ranch house's old cedar chest to find a christening gown for Della's coming birthday, who found what 4 years of looking had missed. Tucked inside the back cover of the family Bible, behind a loose page of recorded births and deaths in Josiah Vance's own hand, sat a second, folded document. The original will, witnessed and notarized 11 months before the one on file at the courthouse. This one said nothing about blood. It left the ranch, plainly, to whichever son remains to steward it, and to any family he builds around him, blood or chosen. But it was the date that stopped Naomi's breath. The courthouse copy, the one gone missing, had been drawn up and notarized 11 months after this one, in the final weeks of Josiah's illness, by a notary whose signature Naomi recognized from town, Hollis Pratt. The same Hollis Pratt who, Elijah mentioned once in passing, had married into the Vance family's extended kin the same year a cousin of Constance's, on her side. She had a second will drawn up while he was too sick to argue, Naomi said slowly, turning the older document over in her hands. Then she made sure the first one never surfaced again. and made the county file go missing the moment I started asking to see it again. Elijah finished. Hollis Pratt was an old man by then, retired from notary work, living alone above the feed store with a conscience that had apparently been getting heavier every year since Josiah Vance's death. He didn't need much pressing. Elijah found him on a Sunday afternoon, laid the two wills side by side on his kitchen table, and simply waited. "Constance came to me the week your father took to his bed," Pratt admitted, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Told me Josiah wanted the language changed, wanted it to favor blood, on account of Thomas being the elder son and deserving more say in it. I was fool enough, or scared enough of losing her family's business at the feed store to draw it up and witness it myself, without ever showing your father the words on the page. He was too far gone by then to read it close. He trusted the seal, not the sentence." "You forged my father's will," Elijah said. Quiet, on his own deathbed. "I've regretted it every day since," Pratt said. "When the file went missing from the recorder's office this spring, that wasn't me. That was her. Making certain the only copy left standing was the false one, and it very near worked." Judge Averill Cole rode his circuit through Cutter's Bend the second week of December, and what should have taken one township meeting to settle took most of a Saturday, packed courthouse and all, with half the county come to watch a story finally straighten itself out in daylight. Pratt's signed confession sat beside both wills on the judge's bench. Constance Vance sat rigid in the front row, dignity arranged around her like a coat 2 sizes too formal for what was coming. "The original witnessed instrument," Judge Cole said at last, "supersedes any later document proven to have been executed under deception. The Vance land passes as Josiah Vance actually intended it to his surviving son, and to the family that son chooses to build, by any means a family is built." He looked, briefly, at Naomi, standing beside Elijah with Della's hand in hers. "The court finds no requirement, anywhere in this ranch's true history, that a family be measured by blood alone. Constance left Cutter's Bend before the month was out. Nobody asked where to. They married in the spring, in the same church hall where Constance had once tried to shame Naomi under paper lanterns, this time strung with new ones, brighter, for a different kind of gathering entirely. Della stood beside them at the altar, in a dress Naomi had sewn herself, and nobody in that room mistook her for anything but exactly what she was. They didn't stop there. Within 2 years, the Vance Ranch had taken in a boy off an orphan train, bound for Amarillo, whose papers had gotten lost somewhere past Fort Worth, and a girl whose own mother had died of the same fever that had once taken everything from Naomi but her life. The house that had once measured its worth in bloodlines filled instead with the particular unglamorous noise of children who had been told, more than once in their short lives, that they didn't quite belong anywhere, and had finally stopped waiting to hear it again. Naomi still kept her midwife's bag by the door, though these days it saw more use helping other families arrive than it ever had helping her own. Elijah still fixed things nobody had asked him to fix, and some evenings, on the porch where he'd once knelt down with a ring box and heard the worst thing she thought she had to confess, they'd sit together and count the ways a family could be built that had nothing at all to do with what either of them had once believed disqualified them from having one.